Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop SIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop SIS. Hey, you guys. Big welcome back to Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh, and I'm here with co-host Rachel.
Hey, guys. Thanks for being here.
All right. Well, before we jump into today's topic, I guess I'll tell you about today's topic, and then we can go over any announcements before we jump in. But we got some really great feedback from last week's episode. And I think the cool thing about having these conversations is that it's not like we have the answer all of the time, because truly often we're just having a conversation about a tough topic when in fact, like if the answer were clear, we would already be there. But we're wrestling with some of these tough topics. And so some of the feedback that we got was about even just different industries, like what does a teacher do, or what does an ER doctor do, or what does a nurse do? Like how can other types of supports notice, recognize, validate, and support a survivor when when somebody walks through their doors. But then we also had feedback like, I have a really great heart, but I may not say the right thing. And I may, say something that's unintentionally rude or upsetting. So how do we navigate something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And so when Rachel and I were talking about, all right, how do we keep this conversation going? We decided to hone in on the healing journey itself, because I think that if people are maybe just a bit more trauma informed, then that in itself would support any and all conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that being said, when we got feedback from last week from several different sources and people, which we love and appreciate, by the way, well, I'd love to hear your thought process on that topic.
Well, so it took me a while to process it because, again, it's taking me outside of my own perspective and trying to see it from other people, which is really good for me to do. But again, I don't have answers. I just have thoughts. How do we get the police officer to hone in on this case when it does seem crazy, and he has 10 other cases he's working on that are not quote unquote, out there and going to be a difficult case to close? How do we get him to listen to our voice and believe our words enough to follow through with looking into the case? How do we get the nurse to slow down a second and say, we need you to hear exactly what we're saying. I know it sounds crazy, but hear my words for what they really are, and not automatically assume a psychological issue is going on. I don't have answers, and I think it's almost a shift that needs to be made in our culture of being trauma informed. And a lot of times doctors want to medicate every issue, and sometimes medication isn't the answer. But it does take a lot more time to figure out what the answer is then, because medication is real easy to prescribe. Not saying it shouldn't be all the time, but taking the time to understand the survivor on a different level maybe would lead to better answers in occupations. I don't know. My as you and I talked, it was like, okay, we need to get some people in from each of these occupations to pick their brain because what do they need from us? What do they need to know from us so that we can help them see a victim when they come in? And maybe it's just that collaboration and respect for each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry if you guys hear my dog barking. I
It's
don't
all
even know how to help that.
right.
Like, I don't know
Leave
what's
it
more
alone.
annoying, me clicking mute or the dog barking. But yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, which is why we thought, okay, let's start with, like, we know what trauma is. Maybe we need a formal definition, but then also let's talk about the healing journey itself, because oftentimes people think it's a flip of the switch. They think it's a just get over it. They think it's a, and then if you're not over it, then something's wrong with you. And so what I've learned in doing this work for quite a while is that the healing journey is often like the grief cycle. And I think the grief cycle is more well known for it not being a linear line, that there's grief and anger and bargaining. And I mean, there's all these different points. And then eventually you get to where that loss or that grief that you experience, you turn it into you make meaning out of
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think that same cycle could be reflective in the healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it could feel like one step forward, two steps back, three steps forward, two steps back. Um, and so like if somebody were to ask you, tell me, what does the healing journey look like, feel like, describe it? What would your words be?
Oh my goodness. Um, Much longer than you expect, much more difficult than you expect. I think one of the toughest things about the healing journey is up until like once you come face to face with the reality of just how bad your trauma is, it's painful. But then to know that the healing journey is going to be just as painful, if not more, at least to start. I mean, because you're coping your the way that you numb your pain is how you've survived up until this point. And so now we're saying, okay, in order to heal, you're going to have to expose your wound. You're going to have to clean it out and it's going to hurt. You know, trauma survivors are exhausted already from the pain, flashbacks. And now we're going to tell them that in order to heal, you're going to have to feel it every way, shape, or form. And they're supposed to trust us that it's going to work. And they're already struggling with trust. They're already struggling with an intense amount of pain. And so that is why we want to come alongside survivors with Stop SIS because it's something that almost feels and probably is almost impossible to do alone. You can't, it's too painful. But when you have people who have walked through that healing journey and gotten to the other side, or at least better than where they were, they can speak life back until to those who are still in the darkness of that never ending feeling type of pain. So I think holding on to that hope when that healing, during that healing, and it's like you're going for a ride because you're thrown every which way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think hanging around and being around people who have been in through the trenches and
Mm-hmm.
have come out on the other side at least a bit to see that light and to see that it's possible gives everybody around them hope, So as a survivor, to find a community of people of every which way of the healing journey. Nobody's ever really done, I would say.
Right.
And there's people at the beginning, people in the middle, people who've experienced a good amount of healing. Being around that, I think, really for anybody offers hope of like, okay, it's possible. I don't have to stay stuck here forever.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I was having a conversation with a survivor the other day, and the survivor was asking me, how did you get to this point? Like, how are you finally where you are? And I kind of, gave the survivor some, of the things that have helped me. And you could just see him almost shut down and be like, yeah, I that's great that that worked for you. I don't think it's going to work for me. And it's just a defeat before you even, because he's tried, he's done so many different trauma works, so many different programs, and he doesn't feel any better off now than he was 3 years ago, and that is the healing journey. Almost, you don't see the progress all the time. Eventually the fog clears and you can look back and see how far you've come, but when you're in the thick of it, you don't really see all the growth that you're making.
Well, and often if we don't rewire our brain a bit, then because what we find is that it's very common for a trauma survivor to have more trauma, to get back in a situation or another relationship or something, to be re-traumatized again and again and again. And we can talk about why that happens, but I think at the core of why that happens is because we haven't developed this other side of their brain. Like there's so many roots, as you would say, like we call them like gutters in bowling, like thought gutters, where this is like the our habit, and not just in thinking but in our behavior and our self-worth and our view of the world. Like all of those are really strong habits that if we don't rewire,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to slip back into it, even if we don't like it, because that's our comfort zone, even if we don't want it to be, which is the
Yeah.
fascinating thing, because you could say whatever you want, like I'm going to lose 20 pounds, but if your quote normal, your automatic is sugar and donuts and pop, and that's what you find comfort in. It doesn't matter what you want, your body's going to give you what you expect because of that subconscious programming. So let's talk a little bit about why trauma survivors often are the ones that are re-traumatized, and then we can talk a bit about how that shifts. But I think that most people don't even really realize this is happening because it is so subconscious.
Oh, for sure. So, I mean, I'll just use my own example because I was, trafficked severely as a child. And then as an adult, it re entered my life. And once again, I fell right back into those old habits of living two separate lives, living in, suffering in silence, not telling people. And at the time, it was one of those, why God? Why me? Why am I stuck here again? This just must be my life. But when I look back at it, I can see where it was almost like I bounced back into my normal, because that was the normal I knew as a child, and I had not done any work to rewire any thought process or to even work through my trauma as a child. And what I find fascinating, I don't know if fascinating is the right word, but we'll go with it. Um, I had just started to remember what I had disassociated from it in the past, but my body remembered enough that that became my normal. Like I didn't even have to consciously remember for me to fall back into that same pathway. And so I think oftentimes when we say, okay, I'm just going to forget this happened, or I don't want to work on it, I don't want to pull up new memories, it's too painful, it's really not worth it. Okay, well, you're subconsciously going right back down the same path without realizing it. That's why it's so important to work through your trauma. Because yes, you're going to end up in the same type of situations again without meaning to. Not saying it's your fault, but it's a pattern.
Yeah. Well, in 90 Day U-Turn, we do a lot of work on subconscious programming. And so I've run this program for years without it being a trauma focus, because we all have these things. But
Mm-hmm.
what I often say is, how many times do you have the same New Year's resolution and you're still not there, or you want to have the same 20 pounds to lose, or you've got the same debt or the same or whatever. And so that subconscious dictates 95 or more percent of our behavior, and it's stuff we don't even quite realize we're doing because we think that it's quote normal. And so it's, once you bring that to light,
Mm-hmm.
then you can start working with it and asking yourself, is this still serving me? Is this really what I want? You can do some things to rewire that subconscious programming. um, but you're right, we're on autopilot
Mm-hmm.
most of the time.
Yep.
And
Yeah. And so if your normal is destructive, that will
right,
continue to be your normal.
if you grew up with parents who fought and were angry and threw things, then it's weird to be in a calm, peaceful home
Hmm.
because you're not calm and peaceful even if you're in a calm, peaceful home because you're like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then when it does, you go, oh, okay, now now I don't have to wait anymore because it shot. And
Hmm.
so you're living in this fight or flight mode regardless of the situation because that's what's been more ingrained.
Yeah. And even though you want the peace and the quiet, you can't enjoy it because you're waiting for the destruction.
Right. And so when someone has lived in that fight or flight mode and has these auto, what should we call them? These thought traps or whatever they're called, we can, these gutters. Um, then what's so interesting again is so we think this is normal. We think that peace or healthy relationships or stability is for those people over there. It doesn't feel like it's possible for us to have it because we've never really had it before. And so that's why when you're in the midst of that dark pit, it can feel so dark because you don't even quite have hope that it's possible.
Right.
And then once you start to see that it's possible and you start to rewire your brain a little bit, which just means again, it takes repetition, it takes um, it takes who you're hanging around, it takes this like there's it's called hypnosis, but it's really just speaking life into you when you're relaxed, so your subconscious can absorb it. There's things that we can do to shift this. The the more that you grow that side of your brain, what happens and you will, yeah, let me know what you think about this. But what I'm thinking is as soon as that starts, if you go back to fight or flight mode, or as you say, trauma brain, then it can be like, dang it didn't work, or all for nothing, or you know but now you have skills and you could go back to rest and digest mode or peace or whatever we want to call it and build that to be stronger and stronger, because it doesn't mean that when you are living in that more peaceful way that life's not going to happen. It still will. You still are going to have bad days. You're still going to want to crawl into bed. You're still going to have grief. Like all of that will happen, but you'll trust that you'll know how to get out of it
Hmm.
because you've rebuilt that side of the brain. What do you think?
Yeah, I keep thinking of victim mentality. And I know a lot of survivors hate that term, and I used to hate that term. But when you think of it and you think of how your body bounces back to what's normal, it's like you are stuck in a victim mentality of this is just me. This is just what I deserve. And I was crazy to think I could get out of it for a little while. Who am I to think that I could be free? And you go back into that victim mentality and you live your life waiting for the worst and assuming the worst, and you don't realize it. You think it's all, and it is still happening to you. You are still experiencing awful things, but a lot of it is because you are not able to see the growth or the positive things outside of you or the ways that you could get out. You don't even see the way to get out because you're so stuck in this is my normal. And for me, yeah, once I started to really develop that other side of my brain about dreams and hopes and desires, and that became bigger, and then I have maybe a flashback or something that derails me, I can now remember what it was like living in my dream, and having a purpose, and I want it back. I can distinctly tell the difference between the two, and I know the steps to get me back there quicker. And it's not shaming myself anymore for struggling. I mean, I maybe do that some, but I try not to. And it's just recognizing it, I guess, and defining it for what it is, but knowing what I want and then choosing it. And that I didn't think I had that choice for a long time. I thought it chose me.
And when you think of people like taking a look and saying, all right, why am I here? Why am I in this destructive relationship? Or why is this still happening? And then they look back at your past and see what habits or what, not habits, what patterns
Mm-hmm.
you see. because oftentimes the pattern is reflection of what's really going on in that subconscious, um, what we have identified as our normal. And so we kind of gravitate to it.
Yeah, you hear people say, I must attract the bad guys, but there's more to it than that. And a lot of it is in your subconscious. And that's why we have to pull it out and work on it. And it is painful, but you are going to lead a more painful life in the long run if you don't deal with it now.
Right. Right. Another conversation that I think when we talk about the healing journey and just how sticky it is, it's not A, B. Woo, we're done. It's
Right.
sticky. It's it's not a straight line. And another thing that adds to the layer of the healing journey is if the perpetrator was a family member or
Mhm.
not. We've been doing research on family trafficking versus if it's a pimp or if it's some other person who's hurt you.
Mhm.
And I'm understanding just the complexities that happen when there's family involved. Because if you think of somebody being a pimp or a, spring break, like just like a bad guy
Mhm.
outside that hurts you, you run back to your family and you have hopefully a place where you can gain comfort and support. But when it's your family that's doing the trafficking or the abusing, number one, radically honest about what's really going on, right? Like that's step one, like, holy cow, this is not okay. And then eventually, most likely, boundaries need to be made,
Mhm.
separate yourself, right? And then, who do you run to for comfort and on holidays and birthdays and that kind of thing? And I think that that just adds a whole nother layer of the healing process for those that have experienced that family layer. What are your
Right.
thoughts?
Yeah, so when you think of the statistics that 93% of victims of abuse know their perpetrator, a huge chunk of that is family, or it's a close family friend who the family isn't going to believe you when you come forward. And so you are put in an impossible situation. And I don't have answers for this. And I would love to hear feedback from other people as far as what your thoughts are. All I can do is expose the difficulty of it because I don't truly have an answer. And a great example is a situation that I was in last spring. I got to speak at a high school, and I'm not sure if I've talked about this on here or not, but I got to speak at a high school and I got to share my story. I got to share the dangers of, exploitation and pornography and kids with their phones and how serious it is when you send a picture or a video and things like that. And so afterwards, I had a ton of people come forward just to say, "Me too," or um, just that they needed help. And so we were able to do a lot of healing work with some of these high schoolers. But one girl in particular, I will never forget because she came forward to me and she said, I just want to add something to your presentation. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. What is it? And she goes, it's not always an adult that hurts you. I said, you're right. It's not. That's a very good point. And she said, I wish somebody would have told me that when I was younger. And something in my spirit, Holy Spirit, whatever, knew right away. And I just said, was it your brother? And she's just crocodile tears pouring down her eyes. And she said, yes, but you can't say anything because if you do, I will lose my mom, my dad, my whole family. And this girl was like, she's valedictorian. She's about to be a senior in high school. And I said, honey, you need help. And she goes, I'll get help later. Right now, I just have to just get through this time. And here she was sacrificing her healing, her safety in order to keep her family together. And she was a part of a strong Christian family. And she just assumed they won't believe me or it will destroy everything that I have left that's normal. And I was sick to my stomach for weeks after this because what do you do when it's your family? What do you do when you are faced with losing everything that you know in order to say your truth? And I don't have answers, but what I do know is if you're in that spot, like that has got to be one of the most difficult things for a child to be in, like just exposing and validating that that sucks.
And I do know the principal got involved, and they
Yes.
did, because this is a serious situation. I don't want people to think like, well, see you later. No, they did.
No, it was a mandated reporting situation. And so things were taken care of. But I will not forget the fear in her eyes. And it was not fear for her own safety, it was fear for losing her family.
And I feel like it sounds like an obvious choice, like it sounds as a parent, like, of course I want you to be safe and I want but it's not obvious because there's so many emotions involved, especially, and we know that a lot of times the 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 person coming forward isn't believed immediately. And so then they're kind of re traumatized again. And so it's like, do I want to put myself in a situation to be re traumatized or to
Right.
bring up all this hard stuff? I'll just pretend like nothing happened. But
Mm.
unfortunately, your subconscious always knows, your body always knows. And as you said, even though you didn't quite remember everything that happened, you were not coping well.
No, not at all. Yeah. And it reminds me a little bit. And even though these girls were believed, if you've followed at all the Duggar situation, Josh Duggar, he was sexually abusing his sisters. And I think when you think from a parent perspective, you never want to assume that your son could do anything like that. Um, but the reality is they did. And putting him back in that same situation, I mean, I think they say they got him help. I'm not even going to discuss like all of the ins and outs of what they did right and wrong. But the fact is, he came back and re-hurt again and re-hurt again. And that's difficult for parents to want to believe when it comes to their child. And so it's just, you're right, the complexity of when it's happening. Maybe it's a husband, maybe it's the dad to the children, maybe it's a stepdad, maybe it's a grandpa, an uncle, and the child will own the responsibility of keeping their family together, even if that means sacrificing what they're going through. And I think that happens way more than anybody wants to believe.
I know we've mentioned this before, but the reality is the perpetrator broke up the family, right? The
Right.
truth is the victim has not done anything wrong. The perpetrator is the
Speak
one who's
it,
put a
girl.
wedge into the family,
Yes.
and they're the
Wow.
ones that deserve all of that shame. But what we've learned, and we actually will have a guest coming on in the next couple of weeks to talk about this, is that perpetrators often sleep well, and it's
Mm.
the victim that is anxious and has the weight of the world on their shoulders. And it's just not true. I know,
Correct.
I
It-
know it. It's like Mama Bear coming out because you want to protect all of these kids from any wrongdoing and give them a space to talk about it and to feel that wholeness again.
yep. But as a kid, you don't see adults get in trouble. You only see kids get in trouble. Um, it's just how it appears anyway. And so thinking that you're going to tell on an adult and that something good is going to come from it. I mean, rationalizing it when you're a child, already dealing with mature adult decisions and feelings and trauma. It's just I don't know. It feels almost impossible. And I'm not saying it is, but I just don't have the answers on what because I get it is I guess what I'm saying. I get that you like what do you tell a child? Do you tell do you want them to tell their truth or do you want them to lose their family? I mean, of course you want them safe, but man.
well, in an ideal world, right? I
Right.
want you to tell your truth and your family to get closer. You know, like I want you to tell your truth and for your family to rally around you and get the perpetrator out of the way. Like that is
So
what
it's,
I would want. And it breaks my heart that that's not what happens.
and oftentimes, I'm sorry, but oftentimes Christian families are the worst at it because of they need to keep safe face and look like they have it all together. And exposing that somebody in their family is struggling with such a sick thing, people they don't want others to know. And so they keep it quiet, which then silences the victim. But maybe this is the same as creating a respectful collaboration with officers and nurses and doctors and teachers. Maybe the same needs to be done with parents. Maybe that conversation of, hey, we need to open our eyes to not only possible victims, but possible beginnings of perpetrators. Because yes, we're focusing so much on the victims and the percentage of victims and whatever, but perpetrators are being raised up too. And, I think oftentimes pornography can lead into that. And so just having the real conversations that people don't want to talk about is going to create a safer country for us in reality. But so often we want to just not face it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got two thoughts on, well, one thought on this, and then I'm going to shift the subject a minute. Because one of the topics that we have listed that we haven't really talked about, because I don't know that it can be a full episode, but it's the fact that oftentimes parents act like children and they don't have the emotional capacity, the communication skills to have these hard conversations. And like they just don't know. I mean, we talk about millennials, like they don't know how to talk to people. All they do is text. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, there's a whole group of adults that are similar that
Mm.
don't know how to have a conversation without being like personally triggered and get upset themselves. I saw a meme the other day that was like, it was like a mom saying to the son to the daughter or someone, when you told me about your abuse, I couldn't sleep at night. That really hurt me. Like just like, and you just think the fact that there are adults that act like that blows my mind, but they're everywhere. And so I mean, maybe that's part of the conversation too. Like, let's raise an emotionally secure generation who knows how to have good conversations, debate well, like really talk about hard stuff with the issues on the table and not take things
So
personally and run away.
that's one of the things that Granny has done so well with me. And so when I was meeting with the grannies the other day, we had a Zoom call to encourage the grannies and everything. I I shared some things that I think are um, factual, but it's just my opinion. But I feel like we are all born with these four parts to us, these components: our mind, our heart, our body, and our soul. And I think those four components then lead to these four innate desires of being known, being heard, being seen, and being loved. And when those four things are not met as a child, you then cannot pass it along to the next generation. So I think those children, parents, whatever you want, child parents, who have not grown up do not know how to see their kids, love their kids, hear their kids, all those things. That is where our grannies are stepping into these survivors' lives and saying, I hear you, I see you, I believe you, like you are heard. And it's radically changing these survivors because now not only is it impacting their own self, it is impacting the next generation in their lives. And so it was kind of a powerful moment of them realizing they are helping draw that line in the sand for these survivors and saying no more. Our kids are going to know how to be seen and heard and loved and believed. And it was just kind of a special moment. But yeah, you're right, the parents often they don't get it.
I'm reminded of I went to I'm a youth group leader at um and we went to this retreat for the youth group leaders, and one of the things they said that just boggled my mind, and now I have decisions to make, was basically that if a child came to you and they're struggling, whether it be with identity issues or whatever it was, that you don't tell the parents and that you encourage the child to tell the parents, but you're not bringing the parents in on these conversations. And the reason they go there is because they assume, it seems like, again, I'm listening, I'm shocked, I'm asking questions, I don't quite know what the thought process is behind it. And I think they would say you tell a parent if it's a self-harm issue, but not just like a struggle, I guess. But they basically made it sound like the parents can't be trusted. The parents can't be trusted to handle this well. And so the youth group leader, who is a safe person that now is apparently trusted more than the parent, gets to have these conversations with the kids. And again, I have a sixth grader who still snuggles. So like maybe when they're in high school, they turn into weirdos and I have no idea what's happening. But right now I can't even imagine someone else having these important conversations with my child and then saying, I don't trust the parent to handle it in a way that's helpful. There's just something wrong with all of this equation, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's parents that don't handle it well.
Correct.
We know this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but not giving them a chance to handle it well is tricky too.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, as I'm, explaining that girl and I'm explaining her story, maybe her parents would handle it perfectly well. You don't know, but the fear of them not, the fear of what you could lose keeps her silent.
So, in conclusion to that quick story, this is what I decided, you guys. Because
Oh, I want to know.
gosh, I was wound the heck up. Um, I don't know if we're going to keep going to that church and if I'm going to be a youth leader. Like, I just don't know that I want to put my son in that situation. But it is not easy to just leave. My parents go there, all that kind of stuff. So we're just might check around, see what else is out there and play it by ear. But what I realized is that if the youth group isn't going to partner with me,
Hmm.
I don't know that a teacher at school would tell me if my son is having a stroke. I don't know that, you know, I don't know. And so the only thing I can control is my relationship with him. And
Yes.
so we go out to lunch once a month. I'm going to start making him go on walks with me, like just to take the dog for a walk or just because here's the deal. If we talk about anything, like it doesn't have to be a serious conversation every time, but I want lines of communication to be open. So when something hard happens, we can talk about it.
Yes.
I saw this in relation to marriages recently. Like they were like, here's my wedding advice, like talk a lot. Just talk about your day, talk about what, your highs and lows. I know you do something similar with your kids on the way home from school. Like just talk a lot about anything, because then you'll be more comfortable when or if a situation comes up that your child does want to talk to you about.
Exactly. Yep. And they're watching your reaction to everything. Um, is my mom or dad going to be able to handle if I tell them something difficult? Because I told them something that wasn't near this difficult and they flew off the handle. So they are watching you very closely. And yeah, the communication's huge.
No, it's, again, I know fascinating is not the word, like interesting. I don't know. There is no word to describe this conversation, because then I think of the prosecutor who was at our house when we did your event here. And she's like, they're not going to tell you. Like, come on.
Yeah, yeah,
So at least they have a safe place to talk to the youth group leader. Like, I guess it's better than nothing. I don't know. There's not a black and white answer often, but
right.
oh, geez.
Being a parent is hard. Being a kid is hard. That's why we need the Lord. And end of story.
Yeah, no kidding. And when in doubt, pray.
Yes.
But one last topic I wanted to bring up, because when we were doing research on the family complexities of what happens, and there was another complexity that was brought up, which was DID. So dissociative identity disorder. And there's a bunch, well, I don't know, I didn't do the research on all of them, but there are some programs that do not take people with that diagnosis, who do not understand that specific diagnosis. And it's just kind of another layer of complexity to sharing your truth essentially.
Mhm.
And so I guess I'd love to hear a bit about your thoughts on DID and how that supports the healing process or makes it a bit trickier.
Yeah. So, um, I've heard a lot of different things. Some people will say that dissociative identity disorder, DID, is actually the same as multiple personality disorder. And so that if you have DID, that means you have multiples within you. That is not the case. You can disassociate and not have multiples. So I don't even believe I have been diagnosed necessarily with dissociative identity disorder. I just know that I can lose time. There is a lot of confusion, I feel like, around this because I don't think it's a mental thing. I don't think it's a mental disorder. I don't think it's anything like that. I think it's your trauma response to a difficult situation. You hear stories, and I think you're the one who actually told me about this. When somebody is, let's say, in a car accident or in something super painful and traumatic, you don't remember that response. Isn't that dissociating, basically? And so the same is true when you are going through something so dark and so evil that, especially when you're a kid and you can't comprehend what this is that's happening to you disassociate. That doesn't make you a mental case. That doesn't make you not reliable in your memories. I think part of the struggle, with officers or even anybody in that type of work who is listening to the memory of a survivor who has dissociated, they look for any little thing that doesn't add up. Well, there's going to be a lot that doesn't add up. I can tell you that. But there's going to be a lot that does as well. And if they can focus on the things that do instead of the things that don't, they're going to catch a lot more perpetrators and they're going to rescue a lot more victims. Because disassociating, I'm not going to tell you my memories are 100%, I know for certain he wore this shirt and he, whatever. Like, I can't even assume that I'm getting it all right because I'm sure I mesh memories at times, but I promise you the majority of it is correct. So if you ask me, were you cold? I can't tell you. I don't know, but I can tell you these factual informations. And I think just understanding trauma responses versus a psychological disorder is key. I think oftentimes we overdiagnose when the simple answer is that's how your body reacted to trauma. That's how God kept you safe from your trauma. And it's okay. It's a good thing. And it's not to be judged. And it's not to say that I can't believe your story now.
Amen. Because I do. I think oftentimes it's labeled as a diagnosis and maybe even medicated when it's truly a trauma. It is a trauma response, and healing can happen, but it
Oh,
takes time and it takes consistency and it takes a space to be able to do that, because you're right, you don't heal from trauma on your own. It really does take a community of people to surround you, which
yeah.
is why I love the Granny program that you've created, because not only do you have the community within 90-day U-turn, but you've got the ongoing support from an emotionally stable adult
Mhm.
that will keep in contact with you afterwards.
Yeah. I'll never forget, and this is going back to the DID stuff, my counselor saying to me, do not let anybody tell you you have multiple personality disorder. Like, I mean, she was firm about it. She said, you have no symptoms of that. Just because you dissociate does not mean you're a multiple. And that made me feel so good. Like, not saying that being a multiple personality disorder is wrong or bad or whatever. I'm not judging it. What I'm saying is I knew that didn't feel right. And to be able to hear her say, that's not your diagnosis, that's not your problem. God blessed you with disassociating for a time. It just felt right. And I think oftentimes we go to places for answers and we get something, but we know deep down that's not right. We know we don't need this medication. We know that this comes from what was done to me. But it's also easier to pop a pill than it is to walk through the healing journey.
Well, often, again, it can be, people can be, it can be feel like, well, this is just the way I am, or I was born this way, or this is just who I am, when in fact, it multiple personality itself is also a trauma response. DID is a trauma response. I mean, anxiety, depression, a lot of this stuff can be brought back to a root of
Mhm.
of of that rocky foundation where trust was broken.
I think one thing that really blew my mind the other day when I was talking to the other survivor, and he was asking me, how did you get to this spot? And I was kind of explaining. And then I said to him, what feels safest, staying where you are and knowing that this pain is going to last a lifetime, or jumping into it head first, all in, let me deal with it now so I can live free the rest of my life. And his answer was to stay where I am because it's what I know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We stay where we are, even if we don't like it, because it's comfortable. What
Mhm.
if our comfortable was healthy?
Right.
What if our comfortable was strong relationships, strong communication, drinking a gallon of water a day, exercising? What if our normal was devotions with our family every evening? Yeah. And so that's where that subconscious comes in, because you don't change habits on a whim. It does take consistency. In fact, habits are changed best in community because you have that accountability built in and you've got people who are on a similar journey than you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's possible. But when you're in that spot, it seems
Right.
so far away, but we've
Yeah,
seen
I'm
it
not
over and
judging
over
him.
again.
Like
Yeah.
I was there. I didn't see hope. I would hear people say, "Here's what you could be." Like, okay, all right, you don't understand. I remember those thought processes.
So
So,
you got to connect with an old neighbor recently who doesn't even recognize you.
right? So yeah, one of my she's always been a support, but we have moved and there's just been a lot going on and we don't get to connect as much as we used to. And she actually hopped on our Zoom call the other night when we were talking about our program. And she told me afterwards she had to keep her hand over her mouth because her mouth was dropped open the whole time. She didn't recognize me. She said, Rachel, where you were 2 years ago, I never would have dreamed this. And it's true. It's insane. And she said, I have truly witnessed a miracle right before my eyes. Holy cow.
Mic drop. I
Mm,
know. I know. So it is possible, but the healing journey is not a straight line. And I think
no.
that's when people who don't know the complexities or don't really even have time to dig into it, if it's just a 10-minute appointment or an ER visit, like what's wrong? What's your symptom? Okay, goodbye. So the answer, and again, we don't have necessarily all of the answers. However, I know finding a community that can be with you for the long haul could be a possible step, because going to places that can only see you for 10 minutes at a time isn't really going to be helpful on the healing journey.
Right. I think this is a granny quote. It's as much about opening your eyes to the problem as it is opening your heart to the victim and truly understanding what it is that they need. And yeah, oftentimes police and nurses and doctors don't have time to open their heart to really get to the core of the problem. But I was like, you're right. It's opening eyes and opening hearts. It's both.
Yeah. So then if the police officers and ERs and, because they're not set up for the long-term deeper dives, if they have helpful resources to refer people to, then that could be a step in the right direction too. But
Absolutely. But then, like, I'll throw in a whole other complexity of it. I have police officers who know my story's true, but their chief or their leader shuts it down and says, you are not allowed to work on that case. What do you do then? No answers on my part. I just questions. What does that police officer do then?
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. But that's what we're working with. And that's, I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, and they were talking about familial trafficking and abuse within the home. And they truly believe there are probably way more cases of trafficking within the home than people want to realize. That, I mean, it was probably the abuse taken to that extreme more times than not. And I think the amount of times that I have heard a child is sold for drugs within their home, or for money, or to pay rent, and all of them. I mean, you hear in this podcast, you hear the interviewer saying, "You still went to school? Like they let you out of the house?" Like that's a misconception. A lot of traffickers or trafficking victims are still a part of your everyday life, and they've disassociated, or they are, not allowed to talk about it, and they will try to make as normal as possible their life. And so this familial trafficking thought process, it's happening all the time, and it's happening all around us. And that's one of the trafficking things that is, it's right in front of us, but we can't see it.
When you think of the complexity of the family, when you decide to say what, of course you have this radical acceptance and honesty, and then the boundaries start to come up because you go, I can't pretend like this is fine anymore, and I don't feel safe here, or I don't feel like you, because whether they believe you or not, like, anyway, boundaries typically go up at some point. And then where does the survivor go for community? And I
Right.
think, again, that's where the long term of community really comes into play. So you've got people to celebrate your birthday with, you've got people to hang out with on Thanksgiving, you've got people that you can turn to. And of course, there'll still be a grief about the loss of this family that you wish you had or never had, or the family you thought you had, but now you're realizing it was super dysfunctional. There's grief in losing that, but at least now you can be in a place where you can get your strength back. But then finding that long-term community, I think, is a great first step.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you're not going to know at the beginning if they're long-term or not. But you know that when you're joining a program that's at least 3 to 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, you're going to build relationships that you can hopefully have for life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you go to trusting God, which is difficult for survivors because they feel like God let them down as a child, with being trafficked or whatever. But God is wanting to fill your life with healthy people. Like that's who our God is. The situation that we went through with being trafficked, that's who that's who Satan is, and God walked us through that to where we're now where we are. But He is ready to present us with healthy people, healthy relationships, a love like we have never known before, and a community that is there for your birthday, and I think that's where we need to have our hope and our trust in God. That's number one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is just an interesting conversation, and we hope that our
We
conversation
didn't solve a
was
thing.
helpful. Yeah, we really just brought up the complexity of the healing journey and the grief that comes with it, and the changes that one needs to make in order to start the process of gaining that inner strength. And there's grief in those changes too. So it's not a flip of the switch. It's not they talk about the cardboard testimony where it's like, I was addicted and now I'm not. Like, it's not that easy. So being a place where somebody can um, walk through their healing journey with you is a pretty special thing.
It's priceless.
It's priceless. It sure is. So before I finish with our declare, or I declare, we want to tell you about a giveaway.
Oh, yes, go for
Um, we have some bracelets. Do you have any close to you? Oh, you got it on. Perfect. Okay. It
it. I
says
wear it all the time.
kiss the wave. And would you mind sharing what that quote means to you?
Yes, so it is a Charles Spurgeon quote, and it stands for, or he says, I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. And that has been a big part of my healing journey, is not shaming myself for those difficult times, but instead almost thanking them. that it's thrown me into the arms of Jesus in a way I never would have experienced before. Um, and I'm getting to know God on an intimate level because of the trials that I've been through. And so that's whenever I will say it's a kiss the wave moment. It's a difficult moment that now I am on my knees and closer to God because of that difficult moment. And it just changes your perspective a little bit. And I don't know, it's powerful for me. And so I only had a few made. I think I have five left. So I have the leather also in black, and it does have two separate snaps. So depending on the size that you need it to be, but I wear it every day. It's a good reminder for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's how you can enter to win. Go to our Instagram at STOPSIS. And what I'd love for you to do is press follow, take the link from this episode. So we'll post this episode up on a Monday when the episode goes live. Share this episode in your stories with a little clip of like maybe just verbiage on what you've gained from listening to this podcast. So follow Stop SIS, share it into your stories, and then like and comment on the post itself. And then we will draw 5 people to win a Kiss the Wave bracelet. So certainly you can do that on Facebook as well. If you're not on Instagram, we do have a Facebook page, and we would just love any and all support in getting this word out. And YouTube, heck, why not? If you're on YouTube, comment and share the link in your social, tag us, and we'll check all 3 platforms when we're drawing winners. So we appreciate your support. We know that for survivors, this has been a really great place to not feel alone, to not feel crazy. They're like, oh my gosh, I've experienced this too. This has been really helpful on their healing journey. And then for all of us in the helping profession who want to support those on the healing journey, it's been really, really helpful. I know I have teachers that listen that really want to learn about the brain and how to support someone and how to keep their eyes open. So we value all of you and thank you for being here. And
Oh, can I say one more thing?
oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So as you're talking about all these people and that want to help, and we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but I just want to say, if you're one of those people who want so badly, like you feel it on your heart to help in this like trafficking, abuse, whatever it may be, and you just don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, and you feel like you're actually going to cause more harm than good, just know that being there is enough. Just being somebody's normal is enough. And, I've had people who I think, they've maybe said something that then they go home and they think, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And they feel like they're just not equipped to handle this. Be open and upfront with, whoever it is. Explain, like, I don't know that I'm doing this right, but I care about you. And if you are a survivor and you have people around you who have maybe poured in just a little bit, but then pulled away. Think of it from their perspective of they love you, but they just don't know what to do. It's like when you go to a funeral and you're walking up to the people, and I struggle with this too. Like, what do you say? There's no good words. When you're going through this type of pit, there's no good words, but just being there is enough.
Yeah, amen. And also think about being a granny.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if
And we
you
will help
are want
train
to,
you and everything.
yeah, if you are have a heart for survivors, we do have another cohort, a 90-day U-turn cohort starting, and we'll have another group of girls that come January. We would want to pair them with a granny, and a granny is
December.
December. Yeah,
Want to probably pair them. Yeah.
yeah. So think about that, and you can email openblindeyes at protonmail.com to get information. Nothing committing you to anything, but you can get information on what that looks like. And typically, it's a once a week phone call with texting and connecting in between.
Yeah. It's powerful stuff.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, Rachel's created a workbook for them to go through, and we're just going to continue to make resources for survivors, but then also supporters,
Yeah,
because nobody is doing this alone, and I
right.
think it's powerful for us all to connect.
For sure.
So, all right, you guys. Well, we would love to know your favorite part of this discussion, even though there are no good answers to any of it often. Share your stories and your experiences with us. Check out our Instagram page, join the giveaway on any of the social platforms. And next week, we should be having a guest on. We're going to start bringing on some other survivors to share their stories, what worked, what helped, how it was handled in their family. And we look forward to including more voices in the show as well. So I am going to end with an I declare. I declare I am special and extraordinary. I am not average. I have been custom made. I am one of a kind. Of all the things God created, what he is most proud of is me. I am his masterpiece, his most prized possession. I keep my head held high, knowing I am a child of the Most High God, made in his very image. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day, my friends, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email OpenBlindEyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop SIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.